Greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, Robert Meyer Burnett. I invite you to watch and listen to the Designing Hollywood podcast, brought to you by Martika Ibarra and the great, legendary Hollywood costume designer, Marilyn Vance. I am afforded the wonderful opportunity of co-hosting the show. If you are interested in the magic of Hollywood, the design of Hollywood, the clothes of Hollywood, watch the Designing Hollywood podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts from, or find the video version on the John Campea YouTube channel. That's right, the Designing Hollywood podcast. Why would you ever want to miss it? Especially if you love the movies.
Hey, my name is King, or as some of you might know me better, Israel. I've gotten around, but hopefully you recognize me from my own channel, King Tannic. There's a new show coming to the Burnettwork that I think is pretty exciting. Welcome to the Otaku Experience, hosted by yours truly. There is going to be a weekly series where we dive into the news and the world of anime, manga, and whatever the heck else Japan has to offer us. The show will be pre-recorded and premiere on Thursdays at 2 p.m. Pacific Time or 5 p.m. Eastern, right here on the Burnettwork YouTube channel.
Robservations with Robert Meyer Burnett.
Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of sci-fi and cinema, right there. Mark Chure's drawing of me as your evangelist of the imagination, and of course the as yet undefined existential Mr. Rogers. That's right, me, Robert Meyer Burnett, and I am robcasting at you. You imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community, welcome. By the way, I don't know if I'm being shadow banned or some weird things are happening with my analytics, but hey, I'm going to ask you, I don't normally do this, like and subscribe. Hey, become a member of the channel if you want. We have membership chats for hours on Saturday afternoons, bi-weekly. We have one coming up this Saturday. So do all of that because you know what? Hey, I'm not doing this for my health, right? Listen, the first thing I want to get to is I received a very nice package in the mail all the way from Dublin, Ireland. And it comes to me from Des Doyle. And he was kind enough, he produced a documentary called Showrunners, about television showrunners, which pertains to this particular episode of Robservations. He also was kind enough to include The Quiet Girl, Ireland's submission to this year's Academy Awards. And not to be outdone, he sent me a Showrunners mug. He made this documentary. So a fellow filmmaker, I want to say thank you for that. He also included a potpourri of chocolate, including, I mean, my God, I mean, look at this. Irish whiskey truffle. Does this man know me or what? He sends me this. Look at this. Gunpowder Irish gin. Was I lucky? Oreo bites, Cadbury eggs, incredible. So Des, I want to thank you for that. He also included this letter, which I would like to share with you. As you know, I read letters on the show. Hope this letter finds you and your family well. I've sent you a copy of my Showrunners documentary on Blu-ray and a copy of the Showrunners book we did with Titan. I've been meaning to send these to you for a very long time after I had been talking with Dieter, but when I heard you were moving, I decided to wait until you were settled in at your new address. Then work distracted me here for some time, and then Xmas was imminent, and I didn't want to risk this stuff going AWOL in the crazy Christmas postal season, so here we are. In an attempt to make up for the delay, I have also included a Blu-ray of the amazing and Oscar shortlisted Irish film The Quiet Girl, and to add to your growing collection of mugs in the new house, a Showrunners mug as a housewarming gift. I hope Dieter won't mind me doing this, but I'm also including a stash of Irish candy for you and the family to try. I know he's been your European candy dealer for some time, including some Irish gin and whiskey-flavored bars. always appreciated. So thank you for that. I'm sending these by way of saying thanks for your Let's Get Physical Media show, which I discovered during the heights of the lockdown and COVID. In the past, I've never watched much YouTube, barring trailers and music videos, so your show really hit a nerve with me as I'm a big physical media collector. Blu-rays, 4Ks, books, CDs, comics, graphic novels, video games, figures, replicas, etc. And so I was delighted to find two people with similar tastes and passions online who also provided a very entertaining show and real industry knowledge and experience. Thank you for that. For those of you who don't know, I do co-host Let's Get Physical Media Sundays at 11 a.m. Pacific time with Dieter Bastian all the way from Saarbrücken, Deutschland. So tune in. It's also great to find someone who is a big Star Trek fan and who also enjoys the works of Gerry Anderson. Growing up in Ireland, I was raised on repeats of Star Trek and The Next Generation and Anderson shows, as Irish TV could afford to make very few originals back then. So Next Generation and shows like UFO and Space 1999 are part of my DNA at this stage. You also have me successfully hyped for Picard Season 3 at this stage, as I would have great faith in Terry Matalas, who I know a little, and who I heard said some very kind things about my film when you had him on your channel. I have also watched and enjoyed a number of the Robservations shows you've done, and it's great to hear an informed industry take on the state of the arts at this crazy juncture, as I find some of the other YouTube pundits I've tried rather obsessed with decrying everything to a fault. I recently watched Tango Shalom and really enjoyed it, and I have fond memories of Free Enterprise from seeing it many years ago. I really hope you can make the 4K Kickstarter for it to happen. I would definitely back it. Part of the work I've done for the last few years has been developing new TV series ideas and scripts with Irish producers and writers, as well as bringing Irish writers to LA and placing them in working writers' rooms there. I wish people fully understood how incredibly difficult and challenging it is to produce high-quality TV on a regular basis, and the amount of man-hours, sweat, and tears that goes into it. No one is trying to make something mediocre in a world where the aesthetics bar has been raised so high and where competition in the attention economy regularly reaches new peaks. In case you missed that, I'd like to read it again. High-quality TV on a regular basis and the amount of man-hours, sweat, and tears that goes into it. No one is trying to make something mediocre in a world where the aesthetic bar has been raised so high and where competition in the attention economy regularly reaches new peaks. Just sit on that for a minute. I also heard you recently expressed an interest in visiting Ireland. If you do make it over to Dublin, I'd be delighted. If you do make it over to Dublin, I'd be delighted to show you around the city a bit if you were up for it. I'm also hoping to be back working in LA later this year, so if you potentially had some free time, it would be great to maybe grab lunch. In the meantime, I hope both you and Dieter will continue to bring some joy to Sunday nights with Let's Get Physical Media right until the last disc ever pressed rolls off the belt. The Trash Panda and the Viceroy of Verisimilitude are the Batman and Robin that collectors worldwide need right now. Wait a minute, you just made me Robin. Anyway, warmest regards, Des Doyle. Des, thank you very much for sending that in. And, I've thought it appropriate to start this show with the fact that you did make a documentary on television showrunners. So here's the thing. I'm going to get this right off. I'm going to get this right off my chest, right off the bat. No, I am not a paid shill for Picard Season 3. I'm not. And even if somebody offered me a lot of money, well, let's face it, if somebody offered me a lot of money, I'll do just about anything. When it comes to business, I'm a whore. Pay me what you want. Use me up, towel me off. I don't care. Just whatever you need me to do. As long as, again, it's too difficult to put this kind of work in, so make it worth my while. But here's the thing. As far as I know, and I worked at Warner Brothers 30 years ago in feature production. I worked for the Senior Vice President of Physical Production, Bill Young. After I left there, I worked at Silver Pictures for a little bit. I worked on Free Willy with people that I work with in feature production. So I worked at the studios. And you know what I never heard anybody say ever in the history of studio filmmaking of any kind? That they pay shills to go out there and pay for reviews. Maybe some people do. But no one pays anybody to go talk up a TV show before it's come out. They don't see the studios. You spend any money at a studio, you have to have an invoice. You have to borrow from Peter to pay Paul. Different departments that are in the same room sometimes have to switch invoices. You know, there's paid shills. No, I am not a paid shill. And yet everybody, since I've come out in support, hey, every time they drop a new Picard Season 3 trailer, I extol the virtues of Picard Season 3. And yesterday and Saturday, I was very fortunate to have showrunner Terry Matalas, the sole showrunner of Star Trek Picard Season 3, and a collaborator of his, Todd Stashwick, who earned the part to come play the captain of the Titan A, which is a new character, new to the series that they created. And what was really interesting was in the writer's room for Picard Season 3, Terry had brought over some of his writers from 12 Monkeys. And if you have not seen the 12 Monkeys TV series, it's an adaptation of Terry Gilliam's film, which was itself an adaptation of Chris Marker's film La Jetée. If you haven't seen that, well, check it out. And the TV series that ran 4 seasons was excellent. And if you're a time travel fan, what was so great about 12 Monkeys was how it was structured. They really knew what they were doing. They really thought about it. They were not making it up as they went along. Like shows like, oh, My Beloved Manifest. God bless you all. I know. Manifest is glorious gobbledygook. And I sing the praises of the cast because the fact that you're able to sell that gobbledygook, you're better people than I am. But now here's the thing. Everyone knows, if you look back on this channel, Star Trek has been my favorite franchise since I was 5 years old back in the early 70s. I love Star Trek. It's my favorite thing, my favorite franchise. Captain James T. Kirk is my favorite fictional character of all time. Grew up with him. I even was lucky enough to make a feature film with him 25 years ago, which was fantastic. And hopefully we'll get it out in 4K and you'll see it because it's been out of print for a very long time. But other than that, I love Star Trek. I have not loved Star Trek since 2009. As a matter of fact, I've called it, this would be year 14 of what I like to call the Great Star Trek Hostage Crisis. And here's the thing. The thing about Hollywood, we're in a very interesting place in entertainment in that the franchises that we know and love, take your pick, whether Star Trek, Star Wars, Doctor Who, James Bond, a lot of these franchises have been around. Doctor Who pushing 60 years. James Bond, the first Dr. No, came out in 1962. Star Trek debuted in 1966. Even Star Wars debuted in 1977. All of these franchises, Harry Potter's a little newer, but look at the trouble J.K. Rowling's gotten herself into. But even that franchise, everyone sort of grew up and aged out. Harry Potter is old now. So these franchises are the crown jewels of the entertainment companies, which, by the way, have become bigger and bigger and bigger and more corporately owned as the years have gone by. So what's happened is they have these money-making properties that it's the creation of these properties has been completely flipped. So what happened was Star Trek, obviously created by Gene Roddenberry. Also, he brought on collaborators like Dorothy Fontana and Gene Kuhn early on to help him shape and create and craft the show that Star Trek became. It always fought for its own existence. Obviously, it wasn't going to go past 2 seasons. A letter writing campaign famously saved it, and they gave it a Friday night at 10 o'clock death slot for its 3rd season. Roddenberry was replaced with Fred Freiberger, and it didn't go so well for the 3rd season. Came back as an animated series that ran 22 episodes in 1973 and 74, 2 seasons, one longer, the other shorter. And of course, very famously, and if you look back now, it's pretty amazing it even happened, Star Trek the Motion Picture. A movie that they say on paper cost $44 million. It really didn't. There was so many aborted attempts to revive Star Trek in the 70s that all of that development money gets rolled into the budget of Star Trek the Motion Picture. What development, you might ask? Well, there was going to be a movie called Planet of the Titans that was going to star Toshiro Mifune as a Klingon. And, of course, Ken Adam of the James Bond films was going to be the production designer. And he worked with Ralph McQuarrie to design an Enterprise, which later, famously, well, they fucked it up, but it became the Discovery. That's a true story. The starship, the Enterprise, that was going to be in the Planet of the Titans film from the 70s was repurposed by Brian Fuller, and it was pretty interesting what they did. And then, of course, when Brian Fuller left, they reconceptualized it because I'm sure the new producers, Alex Kurtzman and company, didn't even realize that the Discovery was based on a Star Trek design from the 70s. A cursory glance at certain Star Trek art books would have told them that, but clearly no one involved in Star Trek since 2017 has ever consulted. Well, I've got shelves of every Star Trek reference book right over there, and I could have helped them out, but hey, that's neither here nor there, and that's not the point of this conversation. But here's the thing. What's happened is these corporate properties are no longer controlled by a creator. They're controlled by the corporations that own them. And the corporations that own them have a certain way of doing business. And how they do business is they hire people based on, well, in business, for instance, the first people they want are Ivy League educated business people. Even the Hollywood studios, when they're hiring a creative executive or a person that's going to be controlling whatever movies they make, they look to Ivy League educated people who have master's degrees from Princeton, from Yale, the Ivy League colleges, maybe Stanford, but let's face it, they're not on the East Coast, are they? But that's what they want to hire. And in terms of who gets these franchises now, they're not given out based on people who love them. You get to work on one of these franchises, it's incredibly lucrative. The reason that Bad Robot certainly wanted to get involved in Star Trek, which seems odd because every time that J.J. Abrams did a TV interview or an online interview in 2009 when Star Trek came out, he was very quick to point out in every interview, go back and watch him, I never liked Star Trek. They hired a man to direct and to revive their franchise. They spent $175 million on paper to make Star Trek 09, and it was being directed by a guy who in every interview would say, I never liked Star Trek. But why was he hired? He was hired because Bad Robot was making great TV shows. They had a production apparatus, and J.J. Abrams had directed Mission Impossible 3 for the studio. He was very liked in Hollywood. I've never met J.J. Abrams. By all accounts, he's a very nice person. I am not a fan of any of the 5 science fiction movies he directed. I would dare say that they're products of fraudulent creation, but that's just me. But here's the thing. He looks good on paper. His company, Bad Robot, had made shows like Lost, Person of Interest. They've done a lot of good TV work. Very, very slickly made. They do a lot of their production in-house editors. They've got all of that, but they have to run their business too. So they looked at Star Trek as a very lucrative business to get into. They didn't get into it because anybody was particularly interested in making Star Trek there, but Star Trek was a great, maybe Bob Orsi was, but when was the last time you ever heard from Bob Orsi? But it was Orsi and Kurtzman that wrote Star Trek 09. Now, here's the thing. But you get into business with this franchise. The franchise has marketing potential, merchandising. You can get slivers of all of that. And when they did Star Trek 09, that's what they were hoping to do. They were hoping to curtail the sale of all the Star Trek merch and only sell their Star Trek merch. Well, if you look into the history of the video game that was made when Star Trek 09 was made, it didn't work out so well. The toys that were made from Star Trek 09 weren't very good. They didn't sell. To this day, you can't even buy a model kit domestically of the Enterprise from the J.J. Abrams Star Trek movies. Sure, you can get, well, you can't anymore because Eagle Moss went out of business. You could get other iterations of it, but not a plastic model. The only way you could get a plastic model of that Enterprise was to go to Revell in Germany. I have one, even though it's really not a very attractive iteration of the Enterprise, but that's okay. I like the Enterprise, so I had to get all the iterations of it. But it didn't really work out. Star Trek '09 didn't really make the kind of money they wanted it to make. Between the budget and marketing, you're looking at costs upwards of $250 to $300 million. Star Trek Into Darkness was hideously more expensive. And movies are normally supposed to make 3 times what their budgets are just to break even. The J.J. Abrams Bad Robot iterations of the 3 Star Trek movies they made, Star Trek '09, Star Trek Into Darkness, and Star Trek Beyond, did not cut that mustard. They certainly weren't pulling down Transformers numbers. Why is that? Because Star Trek has always been a niche franchise. I mean, in its heyday, which arguably was in 1994, Star Trek was riding, it was on the top of the world. It appeared on the cover of Time magazine for the first time. Jean-Luc Picard and James Tiberius Kirk, appeared on the cover of Time to promote Generations, which came out 6 months after Next Generation finished its run in strip syndication. Well, it wasn't strip syndication. It was first run syndication. Changed television forever. Anyway, I digress. Anyway, what I wanted to say was that in particular, these franchises are very lucrative. I mean, J.J. Abrams moved on from Star Trek to Star Wars. When you watch The Force Awakens, you might ask yourself, why does the Millennium Falcon have a rectangular dish instead of a circular dish? Well, Rob, everyone knows it got knocked off in Return of the Jedi inside the Death Star. Yes, it's true, but why not fix it up with a circular dish? Well, because anybody that buys merchandise of the Millennium Falcon, whether it's a model kit, whether it's a toy, whether it's a Lego set that has that rectangular dish, Bad Robot gets a little piece. Why does C-3PO have a red arm in Force Awakens? Well, because if you buy a C-3PO with a red arm, we know some of that money goes to Bad Robot. It's all business. I mean, hey, if you like Rise of Skywalker, more power to you. But the problem is, none of our big franchises are controlled anymore by people that love those franchises. As a matter of fact, they'd rather have people that don't love those franchises, because that way they can do something new. These are old, creaky franchises that, in the case of Star Trek, turns 57 years old on September 8th of this year. 57. That was when The Man Trap was first broadcast, September 8th, 1966. I believe it was broadcast on the 7th in Canada, but I always forget if that's true or not. But anyway, one of the reasons that I love Star Trek Picard Season 3 so much is, one, I hated Picard Seasons 1 and 2. Hated it. And one of the problems that people run into with these franchises is that in order to make them work, you have to go back and get the actors that everyone loved in those roles. Now, Patrick Stewart, indelible performance as Jean-Luc Picard. I think that without him, Star Trek wouldn't have moved beyond 13 episodes of The Next Generation. If you watch our documentaries that Roger Lay and I produced on the Blu-rays of Star Trek The Next Generation seasons 1 through 7, and the 5 discs we did of the individual movies, we did discs Best of Both Worlds, Redemption, Unification, Chain of Command, and All Good Things were presented as a single program. The 2-part episodes were. We created more documentaries for those as well. So we did 5 single discs, and we did the 7 seasons of Next Generation, producing over 50 hours of documentaries on the making of TNG. Very proud of that. I worked for CBS for 3 years on that project, and during that time, we were the only new Star Trek programming that was being made. We even had 2 lawyers assigned to us, and boy, we made them run around for us because we were always doing things we probably shouldn't have, but we got away with anyway. Why? Because Roger Lay Jr. and I loved Star Trek, and we were obsessed. We were possessed. Ask anybody who was there working when we were there. Ooh, boy. But anyway, so the thing about what happened with Star Trek was Alex Kurtzman had a secret hideout company. They were given the Star Trek franchise, given keys to the kingdom. They control it all. That's a very lucrative place to be. Now, here's the thing. There's nobody at the studio that knows anything about Star Trek. Interestingly enough, there's not a Star Trek executive. I mean, other studios have executives. You'd think that there would be a Star Trek executive, not like John Van Citters in licensing, who I used to do a lot of work with. Doesn't like me anymore because I was involved in a Star Trek fan film project. But at the time, let me just say that, if there was a Star Trek, like I'm talking about an Ivy League educated story person, a creative executive whose job it was only to do Star Trek. Because one of the things, as anyone knows who loves Star Wars or Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings or Dune, take your pick. The reason these franchises have stood the test of time is because they have great characters, great stories, but they also have a fictional universe that people can delve into full of, let's say it, our favorite buzzword, lore. And everyone loves a fictional universe that they like to become immersed in. They love that. That's part of the appeal of Star Trek. And one of the things, while it was been inconsistent over the years, one of the things that made Star Trek so interesting is that while there were inconsistencies, even all the way back to TOS, people talk about UNESPA, the United Earth Space Probe Agency, versus the Federation versus Starfleet. They were figuring this out as it went along. But for the most part, it worked out. And then if you look at, in terms of lore, Star Trek, unlike any other shows, had something interesting happen. It had an unused pilot that was rejected by the network that was brilliantly incorporated in the only two-part original series episodes in the first season of Star Trek, the Menagerie Parts 1 and 2. To create more bang for their buck, they took the unused pilot with Captain Pike as captain of the Enterprise and incorporated that into a two-part TOS episode. What a brilliant way to save money. It was essentially a bottle episode, but boy, did they get production value out of those. And so that created a lore where Spock was on the Enterprise with a different captain before he was with Kirk. Pike, which is something else that is strange about how modern Trek from Star Trek 09 all the way through The Secret Hideout. Now we have a TV show with Pike. There was a Marvel Comics series about Pike for a while. It's very interesting that the rejected Star Trek pilot, the pilot that the network rejected, has become the basis. I mean, essentially, The Cage, the original pilot for Star Trek, is the pilot episode for Strange New Worlds. I wish they'd paid more attention to that original pilot episode, but hey, that's just me. But anyway, so the people that control these franchises, they're more interested. It's very lucrative. I mean, let's keep cranking out Star Trek shows. The problem is that in the case of bringing actors back and the studios, the executives, the actors are tired of playing these characters and they want to put more of themselves. They want to inject more of their own life experience into these characters. And this happens not just with Star Trek characters, but anybody who comes back wants to put more of themselves into the role. Or in the case of Harrison Ford, they want you to kill that character so he doesn't have to deal with it anymore. But what ends up happening is that in order to attract the talent to come back, you have to appease their ideas and incorporate those into, we saw a lot of that in the Star Trek movies. Patrick Stewart wanted to be seen as more of a romantic, action-oriented lead. And I understand that. I mean, look at how he looks in First Contact. He's buff. Look at what he gets to do in Nemesis. He gets to go off-roading. He gets to be the romantic lead in Insurrection and have a romance. And hey, I don't blame him. So in coming back and enticing him to do Star Trek Picard as a series, it was really Star Trek Patrick Stewart. Because one of the things I understood when I worked on these projects is the actors, and this is not a slam, but the actors that play these roles, they are not the characters they are portraying. They're actors portraying a character that is written for them. And another thing they don't know is the lore. One of the things that surprised me when we did the Blu-rays for Next Generation is I sat down with Brent Spiner. I sat down with all the cast and interviewed them for hours on end. We had a long time with them, and you can see those interviews on the Blu-rays. But Brent Spiner told me, and I believed him, that at the time he told us, and this is back in 2012 to 2014, he said, I've never seen a full episode of Next Generation. The only things I've seen are the movies. And I was like, really? And he said, look, I made the episodes. I know what they were. Why would I go back and watch them? Now, Michael Dorn was the opposite. Michael Dorn, classic film fan. Michael Dorn watched the episodes. He knew the episodes. He also had an encyclopedic knowledge of classic movies. He was delighted, for instance, when Gene Simmons, the great Gene Simmons, came on board and played Admiral Satie in The Drumhead. Of course, everyone else thought it was, Gene Simmons of Kiss? But anyway, so these actors, when they come back, it's a job. They're getting paid, and I don't blame them, which is awesome. So in Picard, especially season 2, you will notice there is a lot of Patrick Stewart's own backstory coming from an abusive home. A lot of the storyline that they incorporated into Picard season 2 was based on Patrick Stewart's own life. And I don't begrudge an actor for wanting to do that. I think that's something people should do. It makes it more resonant to them. So the thing is, not maybe so much for Star Trek. And I think one of the reasons that I hated Star Trek Picard seasons 1 and 2 is I thought it was not very well written science fiction and not very well written Star Trek. The actors tried as hard as they could. Everybody, even the creators, Michael Chabon, who I really adore his writing, but maybe working in science fiction television wasn't his strong suit. And no one really knew. You can tell from both season 1 and season 2 of Picard that no one really had a handle on what they were making. It really felt like we were seeing something being created by the seat of its pants. Now, to be fair, I didn't know showrunner Terry Matalas, who became the sole showrunner of Star Trek Picard Season 3. No one else really wanted to do it. Akiva Goldsman wanted to go on and do Strange New Worlds. Alex Kurtzman went and did his sequel to Nicholas Roeg's Man Who Fell to Earth, which was in itself an adaptation of the novel Man Who Fell to Earth that was written by the same novelist who wrote The Hustler and The Color of Money, Walter Tevis. And that was fine. Actually, admittedly, I will grudgingly admit, I think there's a lot to like in Alex Kurtzman's The Man Who Fell to Earth. So anyway, Terry Matalas, a man I didn't know, was given basically the key to the kingdom to showrun Star Trek Picard Season 3. And he could do whatever he wanted. Now, the thing about Terry Matalas is he started working in the entertainment business in Deep Space Nine in the post-production. He was an intern for post-production on Deep Space Nine. He worked for Brandon Braga on both Voyager and Enterprise, and then went on and worked with Brandon on shows like Threshold and worked his way up as a writer-producer. And now he's a writer-producer-director on Star Trek Picard Season 3. Now, I didn't know Terry. I'd never met Terry. But there was, he had tweeted out, and of course, I, like everyone, I've hated modern Star Trek. I hated all of Discovery. I hated all of Picard. Strange New Worlds it seems like a Vegas nightclub version of Star Trek for various reasons, but not a fan of modern Star Trek. Lower Decks and Prodigy they're inoffensive. And, Lower Decks has a lot of humor in it, but it's more farce as opposed to being a comedic version of Star Trek. It's more of a farcical version of Star Trek. And whether it exists on its own or not, I don't know. But I don't mind Lower Decks, and Prodigy has had some interesting stuff happening in it. But the live action stuff, I mean, talk about the 31st century has never been more unimaginative and disappointing than it has been in Star Trek Discovery. So anyway, Terry Matalas had made a crack about giving the Next Generation a proper send-off. And I'm like, what? All good things wasn't enough? And then he and I I was afforded an opportunity. Let me just explain that when you work in post-production, when you work in Hollywood, if you are a fan and you are so motivated, you can get your hands on just about anything. And you can also see anything. I mean, you have to know people. But let's just say that I was afforded an opportunity to see Star Trek Picard Season 3. And Terry was dubious. And I convinced him that I did. Now, here's the thing. Once again, let me reiterate. This was a clickbaity headline. I am not a paid shill for Star Trek. If you watch this channel for any length of time, you know my vitriolic hatred for modern Star Trek is very well documented. And it's not because of Star Trek Axanar. It's because I have been disappointed with the storytelling. I've been disappointed with everything from set design to visual effects to everything, all of it. It's all been disappointing. Music, you name it. I didn't like the changes they made to Brian Fuller's original conception of the show. For instance, the tardigrade in the first season was actually going to be a character in engineering. There was no spore drive. And what's really interesting, what's unique is both Brian Fuller and Neil Druckmann probably saw the same nature documentaries in the aughts about the micellular network, because both The Last of Us and Star Trek Discovery and their spore drive come from the same inspiration, which is sort of funny. So anyway, I saw Star Trek Picard Season 3 that I've been talking about for months now. To be honest, I've seen all the iterations. I've seen Star Trek Picard Season 3 all the way through 3 times. And I love it. And I'll tell you something. No one, let me be nice and crystal clear. No one paid me. No one told me. No one gave me anything. I just wanted to see it because I love Star Trek. And when I saw it, here's a very interesting thing. What Terry did was he changed everything. When you watch Star Trek Picard Season 3, it's like watching a different show. It feels different from the very beginning. Structurally, it feels different. Everything feels different. The music feels different. Everything. But what was apparent to me is that it just felt like Star Trek. And because it's the Next Generation cast, and I had gone through making all the documentaries with them and even hosted a roundtable conversation up in Calgary celebrating the 25th anniversary, I knew all the Next Generation cast. And one of the things that surprised me about Star Trek Picard Season 3 is how good they all are. The writing for Star Trek Picard Season 3 is just really good from a character standpoint. There are recurring character themes throughout the whole series. I loved it. I've watched all 10 hours 3 times. I loved it for no other reason than I thought it was very good Star Trek. It has an epic, sprawling, fun, action-adventure romp of a plot. It has high drama. It has emotional stakes. It has everything you want. It is, to me, it's a Next Generation movie told over 10 hours. That's what it is. It feels like the best Next Generation movie we just never got. And I love it. And I love the characters. I love the new characters. Ed Spaliers and Todd Stashwick play new characters that we haven't met before. There's old friends. There's old acquaintances. And there's new characters. And I'll tell you, there's characters, even we know that there's the Titan A. I'll tell you something. You have more affection for the bridge crew of the Titan A than you ever did for any of the bridge crew on Discovery. Not because the actors aren't good at what they do, but the characters, they're just not defined. And it felt like Star Trek. So it's just crazy to me that as a lifelong Star Trek fan on Twitter, there are all these people I've been tub thumping for how good Star Trek Picard Season 3 is. Now, are angels going to open and come down from the heavens when you watch this? No. It's Star Trek, but it feels, here's the best thing for me. I read lots of Star Trek novels, more than I should probably even admit to. I have shelves and shelves and shelves of them over there. But when you read or watch the series, and again, I've said this before, the closest thing that I can say that Star Trek Picard Season 3 is like watching the Star Trek version of Top Gun Maverick. If that makes any sense at all. Star Trek Picard Season 3 is the Top Gun Maverick of Star Trek. That's what it is. But instead of one person, instead of Maverick coming back, it's a bunch of people. And yes, you know, you have to deal with certain canonical issues that have come about because of Star Trek Picard 1 and 2. You have to remember that the Rikers, both Deanna and Riker, lost a son in the first. You learn that in the first season of Picard Season 1. That's something that you should remember. If you don't, you know, it's perfectly explained. But I just liked Star Trek Picard Season 3 because it was like, it felt like I was watching a Next Generation movie about these characters coming back 30 years later. Whether, or something like The Professionals, the Western The Professionals, or The Wild Bunch. And I was smiling the whole time. Smiling. I'll tell you, I'll admit, I shed tears. I defy any Next Generation fan not to cry in episode 9. That's all I'm going to say. And other episodes too, but specifically in episode 9. You've been warned. But I like it. But I find it interesting every time a trailer has come out. Everybody online's calling me a paid shill. Who would pay me? And how much? I'm curious. I always want to know, how much do you think a paid shill gets? Like, I'm not a cheap, easy lay. If you're going to pay me to go out on social media, I've got my Star Trek bona fides, my rep. As if, how could you have a Star Trek rep? Like, I don't work for Star Trek. I have never worked on any of the shows. I've only worked professionally and peripherally for the franchise. So here's the thing. I've only got my reputation and my word about this. That's it. And I just think it's so funny that all day long on social media, I've been getting emails and DMs and all this. Look, man, I'm no longer alone in the wilderness. There's 6 episodes that have gone out to be reviewed. I'm sure some people are not going to like them. I find that hard to believe, but there's people that don't like lots of things. I mean, there are people that hate The Godfather. Overrated. People don't like Shawshank Redemption. Boring. Whatever. And today, you can't please, I don't trust anybody under 30. What can I say? But the idea that I'm a paid Star Trek shill. Come on. I mean, you could pay me in, like, model kits or something. I'd take those. but I don't think they would do that. But anyway, I just wanted to get online and do some clickbaity headlines and see what people would say. And read a few letters. Because what I really wanted to do was, I've got a few, as you know, as everyone knows, you can write me letters at the Burnettwork or postgeeksingularity.com and send me letters for this show. And I've got a few that one of them in particular I really wanted to read, and this I thought was fascinating. Now, I'm not going to say who wrote this. Let's call this an anonymous letter. And this was in response to my discussion of AI, talking about AI art and things like that. But actually, the first thing I would like to read before I get to this letter is from Joe P. He writes, Star Trek Picard Season 3, quell my fears. Greetings, Metal One. Quick mind meld for you to ponder. By the way, our shuttlecrafts not only park in the same shuttle bay, I believe ours might travel so fast that the occupants of said shuttlecraft turn into giant salamanders and mate. Not that there's anything wrong with that. And by the way, you can hear a discussion of that recently. It was just put up online. I, too, have felt let down by the current stewards of the Star Trek IP since 2009. And after Season 2 of Picard, I thought I would just stick with rewatching our beloved episodes of yore. Side note, watching Discovery is like mental flogging. I do it, but I know it's going to hurt and not get me to the crescendo. Your stamp of approval on Picard Season 3 is huge. It carries as much weight as trying to transport 2 whales and the water to house them into a bird of prey. Just saying. My question to you, sir, is quite simple. You say it's a return to form, but will it make me hopeful? Will Picard Season 3 entertain me while inspiring me and having me aspire for something greater? Fan service is great, and the thought of Worf absolutely wrecking folks with his new blade is rather enticing. But is it more than that? Will it make me think? Will it put a smile on my face? Will there be tear-jerking moments that make me yearn for more and aspire to be a better man in the 21st century? Or will there be times when I see 21st century tropes in the 24th century, having me want to scoop my eyes out with a melon baller. One last question for the man built of transparent aluminum, the strongest metal known in the universe. If Picard Season 3 is what you feel it is, and receives an outpouring of love and support, what is the likelihood that Terry Matalas would become the Star Trek czar? He needs to captain this ship if it's as good as you say it is. I'm looking forward to whining about movies return. A bottle of Camus fueled this letter. Don't judge. I can't feel my face. All the best, Joe P. Well, Joe, you ask, will Star Trek Picard entertain you while inspiring you and having you aspire for something greater? Will it make you think? Will it put a smile on your face? And will there be tear-jerking moments that make you yearn for more and aspire to be a better man in the 21st century? I can say unequivocally, yes, it does all of those things. And as the Telosian said in The Cage, and more. It does. It does all of those things. It is heartfelt and emotional. And there is an emotional core that runs through Star Trek Picard Season 3. Let's just put it this way. You have families. You have the Rikers. I mean, did Deanna take Riker's last name? You have Geordi. As we know, has daughters that are in this. So there is an undercurrent of, and I don't mean family in a fast and furious way. I mean families. And obviously, look, it was called The Next Generation for a reason. And Terry Matalas himself has said this is about the next generation. It is very heartfelt and very emotional, surprisingly so. And that's one of the things that'll make you realize, oh my God, this feels like Star Trek. And, you know, there is a tradition, especially as the movies started. I mean, the first time you ever had a sense of family, I mean, real family in Star Trek was in the second season of the original series. Journey to Babel. What did we see? We met Amanda and Sarek, Spock's parents, played by Amanda Wyatt and the great Mark Leonard. Jane Wyatt and the great Mark Leonard. And here was a story about two Vulcan men, a father and a son that didn't get along. Vulcans that didn't get along. And the human mother, one of them loved, they both actually loved. And so the tradition of families in Star Trek and even, I mean, it has existed. And that's one of the things about generations. When they grow up, they have families, and then there's a next generation. That's all part of the show as well. And that's one of the things that makes it great. And look, you get a rousing, let me just say, Star Trek Picard Season 3 is not about Christopher Plummer, General Chang's daughter, wanting to wreak havoc on Picard and Company. That's not all it is. I mean, there's obviously some of that. Obviously, Vadic is a great villainess. But there's a lot more to it than that. Everyone's like, is it just another villain? No, that was the problem with I think, Star Trek. It became, Star Trek, remember, was never about villains. It was about antagonists. So let me just tell you, Joe P., you will not have to worry. I think you will quite enjoy it. So this comes from Keith O'Neill, and he writes, my personal imagination connoisseur mission statement. I wanted to read this too because one of the things about this channel that people don't quite understand, especially whenever I talk about Star Trek Online, I get attacked by a lot of people that don't like me or don't know me. And they want to know, what does it mean to be an imagination connoisseur? Who are you? You paid shill. So this is something interesting that I wanted to share again, that Keith O'Neill wrote. My personal imagination connoisseur mission statement. As you know, we're going to be running a short story contest and publishing a book at the end of the year called The Imagination Connoisseurs. And the premise is, what is an imagination connoisseur? Define it through your work. Write a story that will appeal to imagination connoisseurs. Write a story about your journey becoming an imagination connoisseur. What does it mean? It was a term I just made up. So here is what Keith O'Neill says about being an imagination connoisseur. Hey, Rob, I saw your video this week regarding fan discourse. As you said, we as a fan community and imagination connoisseurs can do better. Like I imagine others did, I did some introspection and asked, what can I do better? So after some thought, here's what I am doing. Keep the criticism about the art. Don't make it personal. When The Last Jedi came out, fan discourse regarding it became World War III. Somehow you were either wrong or a bad person for disliking the film. Sure, some defenders of the movie went overboard, but all the attacks on the actors and director Rian Johnson were uncalled for. We can't do that. 2, don't force someone to like something that you like. Different opinions make the world go round. I'm speaking from experience here. I love Batman v Superman. It was so different from what we got in the comic book movies. There were comic panels come to life. Larry Fong's cinematography was amazing. The cast was magnificent. But one thing that took my enjoyment of the movie was the backlash it got. I tried convincing a friend of mine who hated it that it actually was a good movie and he should give it another chance. That's not counting hours online defending the movie. So it was a teaching moment for me. If someone doesn't like something you like, don't take it personally. As the hip kids say, do you, boo? I can sense Rob revoking my Post-Geek Singularity membership after typing that last sentence. No, you don't. I take it all in good humor. Number 3, if you're going to give criticism, be constructive. Elaborate on why you don't like something in a comic book, movie, or TV series. Don't just say, Jurassic World Dominion stinks because I don't like it. Well, why don't you like it? Because it stinks. That's called circular reasoning, kids. Instead, say something like, Jurassic World Dominion wasn't good because the plot with the giant locusts wasn't fleshed out. People seem to be a little too well adjusted to dinosaurs existing again, and the plot point of the teen girl being a clone of her mom, and the mom giving birth to her own clone, is unoriginal. It was stolen from Y the Last Man. See? That's more thorough than it stinks. The final point, be positive. Use Rob as your own personal North Star when it comes to fandom. Don't be the reason people say nobody hates Star Wars more than Star Wars fans. So those are my guidelines for my own personal fandom. Others watching can feel free to adopt it if they think it works for them. Thanks, Rob, and stay metal. Keith O'Neill. Well, Keith, I've read that before, but I wanted to read it again in the context of this show. Here's another one. Let's see where I can find it because I like this too. Wait, let me find. First of all, here's another thing I wanted to say. So a lot of people, I don't know why, but today they've been firing off, is Picard still a robot? Well, here's the thing. Do I like the fact that they made Captain Picard? They gave him an android body. One of the Sungs had perfected robot android technology to the point where... Now, here's what I would say. Yes, Picard's a robot. It happened. They killed him in season 1. He was reborn in the body of an android. That's what happened. Canonically, that's what happened. But I would say this. The idea of humans being, human consciousness being moved into android bodies is not new to Star Trek. In fact, in an early first season episode of the original series, way back in 1966, this was dealt with in the episode, What Are Little Girls Made Of? When you had Christine Chappell's fiance, Dr. Roger Corby, introduced. He had found alien technology that was developed by the old ones. And he was creating android bodies that people could live forever in. The problem is, the message of that episode was giving up your humanity and putting it into an android body was horrific. So nobody would really probably want to do that. In the second season episode, I, Mud, we saw androids, the Norman android and all the androids that surrounded Harcourt Fenton Mud, are you been drinking? Season 1. So the idea that Jean-Luc Picard's original body perished, which it did, and his consciousness, his katra, whatever you want to call it, everything that he was, his essence was put into a new android body, is not something that comes out of left field. It had been a part of Star Trek lore and history since the very first half of the first season of Star Trek, the first 66, 67 season. So it's not something that, look, I thought it was stupid, but it happened, and he's probably not the only person in the Star Trek universe that you would know that has an android body, considering this is something that exists. And speaking of that, if I might recommend David Mack, he wrote an excellent Star Trek novel trilogy I called it I don't know if it's officially called this, but the Cold Equations trilogy that deals with all the Sung androids. And when you read that trilogy of books, and I know the books aren't canon, I understand, but David Mack's Star Trek novels, all of them are worth reading. By the way, he wrote the Star Trek Destiny trilogy, which is, to me, some of the finest Star Trek ever told. And I'll tell you something. I do not know why. I do not know why they have never delved into Star Trek novels. Although, hey, that's not true. Star Trek Strange New Worlds did rip off, unaccredited, Dorothy Fontana's Star Trek novel, Vulcan's Glory, from the late 80s. I guess if you're going to steal from somebody, you might steal from the woman who was instrumental in creating Star Trek in the first place. But, hey, I mean, number one's entire backstory was stolen, yes, stolen, from that book. That's another reason why I find the fraudulent creators that control modern Star Trek frustrating. Alex Kurtzman's happy to acknowledge, yeah, we ripped off Ursula K. Le Guin's short story, Those Who Walk Away from Umlaas, in the first season of Strange New World. So, oh, great, you rip off Ursula K. Le Guin and Dorothy Fontana in the first season. All you have to do is give them a story by credit. Even when they did Arena in the first season of the original series, they credited Frederick Brown's original story, which bared a lot less resemblance to Arena than your episodes bear to Dorothy Fontana or Ursula K. Le Guin's work. Just give them a little story by credit. How much can it cost? You know, it'd go a long way. But, hey, I guess if you, as the male executive producer and creator of a show, want to steal from female creators in this day and age, and no one's going to call you on it, and you can get away with it, that's your prerogative. Shouldn't do it, though. If you're going to steal from female science fiction writers, give them some credit. Just a story by credit. I know maybe you don't have to. I don't know. Is the WJ down with that? I don't know. But anyway, that's just me. But I think that, yeah, I'm tired of fielding the questions. Picard died. He's a robot. Yeah, in Star Trek history, there's a long, Reign of the Android and Requiem for Methuselah. It's not like people haven't dealt with this before. It's technology that is canonical in Star Trek history. Do I like it? No. Would I have done it? No. But you can still care about Jean-Luc Picard because it's still him. So please, people, please, you know what? It's here are my two irksome things that I put up with that I'm at the end of my rope. The Simpsons meme of the old man shouting at clouds. How many people? Hundreds of people. And every person who sends it to me thinks they're the first person clever enough to send me that meme. Well, you are not. I promise you're not. The second is, please don't keep telling me that Picard is dead and he's a robot. In Star Trek history, going back 100 years to the original series, having human beings transported or their essences transported into android bodies is something that Star Trek dealt with since the first season of the show. Anyway. So, here's another letter. Adam N. says, "Hey Rob, I recently found your podcast through the guys at the Popcast, a podcast I really like. I've been catching up on your Robservations and I've liked what I've heard. You have great insights and are clearly very knowledgeable about the movie and TV world. I'm very excited for Picard Season 3 and I'm thrilled to hear it returns to the classic feel of TNG. I have a vivid memory of my parents taking me to see Star Trek V in theaters. I was 4 years old and already a huge Star Trek fan. They had explained to me, however, that this wasn't the Star Trek I was used to. I had questions about who these guys named Kirk, Spock, and McCoy were. For me, Star Trek was the next generation. That was my touchstone and has been ever since. Those characters were my heroes as a child, and I've missed them dearly. I must admit a bit of apprehension over Season 3, given the poor quality of the writing and the storytelling on Seasons 1 and 2. But I am cautiously optimistic about Season 3. Thank you for your enthusiasm for Star Trek. I have enjoyed your veiled spoilers, and maybe I have, maybe I haven't, on seeing the season. Ha ha ha. Listening to you in the podcast has reinvigorated my love and desire to see more good Star Trek and recapture that wonder and astonishment I had as a child." Well, Adam M., I think you're going to be happy. I think you are really going to enjoy what you're going to see. And, I'll flat out say it, and this is not hyperbolic. The Next Generation cast uniformly has never been better than they are in Star Trek Picard Season 3. Never. They've never been better, and they're all given great stuff to play. Which, how cool is that? So this next one comes from Zach Stewart. Zach writes, "Hello, Rob. I've been a lurker amongst the Post-Geek singularity for some time now. I felt compelled to write to you about something I've struggled with until discovering this community. First, some details about me. I'm 23 and recently graduated from college and began my career in architecture. I've always been a film fan, and my passion for film and fandom has grown exponentially over the years. I collect physical media, want to collect hot toys eventually, build model kits, create art of my own, and I have an unhealthy obsession with Lego, my poor bank account. Rob, I feel strange amongst my generational peers, and let me tell you why. My father is to thank for the interests and hobbies I have today. You're the only other person I've seen with as much of a love and interest for Star Trek as my father. He, too, hates modern Trek. You two could be best friends, laugh out loud, while we certainly park our shuttlecrafts in the same shuttle bay. Growing up, I was always watching old VHS tapes that my dad had collected. Between that and my gateway into film and the music I was brought up on, I feel almost out of place within my own age group. There isn't as much of an appreciation for these things amongst people my age. I don't see a true love for anything that isn't modern and fresh. Not to discredit anyone, but it saddens me that pop culture has phased out some of the greatest content and pastimes ever, at least amongst the youth of today. As I said before, this really has made me feel out of place, and I find it difficult to connect through these mediums with my own peers. My favorite film of all time is Aliens, with Ghostbusters a close second. I grew up on this style of film and found a love and passion for sci-fi and film of the 80s. My favorite shows that my father introduced me to over the years were the original Little Rascals show and Batman 1966. My father and I built kits together when I was younger. I eventually started building my own, and we would go to conventions and enter in competitions. The model kits I build range from military to sci-fi and automobiles. When you mentioned Cult TV Man recently, it sparked these thoughts. I've met him at model conventions in the past, and I'm always enamored by his kits on display. It is surreal to see that passions and interests of mine are dying off in real time. The most depressing realization I've had is that these will never last my lifetime. I almost feel like I'm an honorary member of another generation. I'm eager to hear your thoughts, and I hope to become a channel member soon and talk to you about these things more. So, there you go. Well, Zach, as I said before once, you are welcome here. And I agree with you. Here's the thing. It's hard. Like, I have model kits. There's Eagle transporters. There's starships everywhere. Darth Vader's TIE fighter is up there. It's hard to, when we were younger, when you're kids, I mean, nowadays we got Gunpla, Gundam models. Gunpla is what it's called if you build models. People are building those anime kits and things like that. The reason that I loved spaceship models as a kid was it was the only way I could experience them. You have them in your hand, you build them, you paint them. I this is a flying model rocket right here, which I built. This is a Estes model rocket. It was my favorite model rocket when I was a kid, and this flies on an E and larger engines. It's an upscale, called an upscale. And I wanted it, so I bought it and made it. but nowadays, the only way you could have that experience was when you built them and you paint them and have them in your hands. Why build a perfect Bandai or D'Agostino? Why build one at 1/72nd scale or studio scale when you can fly it in a video game? And I think that's the difference. You can fly a photorealistic Falcon in a video game, whether you're playing Battlefront or whatever Star Wars game's coming out, Fallen Order or the sequel. It's hard to muster up enthusiasm, I'm sure, as a kid. Why build a model which takes a lot of time and a lot of patience when you can just jump in front of your TV and throw in a console game and whether it's PlayStation 5 or Xbox X and rock out? I get it. It's just a different time. But, what can we do? But I feel you. You and your dad always have a place here. So that's kind of what I want to say. Now, there's some people that have been firing in some super chats. Let me get to these. Rampage Predacon has been a member of the channel for 3 months. Thanks for that, Rampage Predacon. Tom Jr. Jackson says fist bump, sends in a super chat. Thank you for that, Tom. Mind of Inception says, hey, Rob, I'm new to your channel and love your energy and enjoy your podcast. I grew up on Star Wars mostly, but recently I've been wanting to watch Star Trek. What would you recommend? Much love. Well, here's what I tell everybody. How do you get into Star Trek? Okay, it's a little tricky in the beginning to do it correctly. Because if you go back, and now apparently Star Trek is exclusively all streaming on Paramount Plus. So you have to have Paramount Plus, which you should get anyway, at least for 10 weeks to watch Star Trek Picard Season 3. But how you should begin is begin at the beginning. The problem is, when Star Trek originally aired, they fucked up. So famously in Star Trek history, there was the cage that was made. That was the rejected pilot with Captain Pike. Do not watch The Cage first. I don't care what it says. Don't watch The Cage first. We'll get to that in a minute. The next thing you should watch is the second pilot they made for Star Trek. The second pilot, called Where No Man Has Gone Before. And that is actually the first Star Trek episode made with Kirk, but it was the third Star Trek episode aired. So when you watch things, you have to watch The Man Trap, The Man Trap, Charlie X, and then Where No Man Has Gone Before. Don't do that. The great thing is, again, you're watching Star Trek canon and lore be created, because Star Trek, the episode Where No Man Has Gone Before, is halfway between The Cage and what eventually becomes regular Star Trek. So you've got to watch your first Star Trek episode ever should be Where No Man Has Gone Before. Then you can follow the order if you want. But what I would suggest is make one other change from the order. Listen to your Uncle Bob. Watch Where No Man Has Gone Before to start, and make the second episode you watch after Where No Man Has Gone Before the first episode shot after that, which is the Corbomite Maneuver. Just do that, okay? Just do that. Just do it for me. Watch Where No Man Has Gone Before, then watch the Corbomite Maneuver, and then you can watch Man Trap and Charlie X, and you're off to the races, and then just follow it all the way through. That's how you should start with Star Trek. And by the way, Mind of Inception, this is his first super chat to this channel. So thank you for that. I really appreciate that. Glenn Gemin says, I rewatched Nemesis. I'd love to hear you opine on Star Trek Nemesis. Anything much to like in your opinion? By the way, thanks for answering my tweet earlier, you rock dude. First of all, Star Trek Nemesis is problematic for a number of reasons. First of all, the man they had to direct it was Stuart Baird. Who is Stuart Baird, you might ask? And what was the movie he directed before he directed Nemesis? Stuart Baird is one of the greatest editors in Hollywood. He's edited Bond films. If you go back and you look at his filmography, if you go into the IMDb and look up Stuart Baird, unbelievable editor. Hated Star Trek, could give a fuck. But the studio owed him a favor because he came in, the way I heard it, and he saved Tomb Raider, the second Tomb Raider, Angelina Jolie movie. So as a favor, they gave him a movie to direct. Paramount owed him a movie to direct. And what was the least offensive thing they could give him? Because the Star Trek franchise has never, ever been treated the way it should. You give it to fraudulent creators all the time, all the way back to Star Trek Nemesis. So Stuart Baird directed Star Trek Nemesis. The second thing is the writing. The Star Trek Nemesis was written by John Logan. John Logan, Academy Award winner, wrote Gladiator, wrote Scorsese's The Aviator. He's a great screenwriter. Terrible writer for Star Trek. Not the guy to write Star Trek. First of all, one of my big pet peeves about modern Star Trek is people that don't understand the concept that they're writing about, like clones. Star Trek Nemesis asks you to believe that this clone that was made of Picard by the Romulans, when, for what, that they can feel. The understanding of clones isn't there. And it doesn't work. Just like the synths in Picard season 1. So John Logan's script. Boy, I really hope somebody like John Logan doesn't come along and get control of Star Trek again, but his script was not good. The third thing that was wrong with Star Trek Nemesis is, again, Patrick Stewart wanted to go off-roading. So they have a ridiculous scene in that movie. I mean, and I use that metaphorically. So if Patrick Stewart or Brent Spiner wants to do something, what they wanted to do had to be in those scripts, and they became a little ridiculous. There is one shining moment, or one shining thing about Star Trek, and of course, Data dies in a Star Trek Wrath of Khan-like sacrifice, because every Star Trek movie since then has been looked at. They look at Star Trek The Wrath of Khan, and they're like, well, let's do that. Why not look at Star Trek For the Voyage Home and go, let's do that instead? No, please don't, because then you get Star Trek Picard Season 2. But yeah, when the actors have too much input over their stories, they're not necessarily thinking about the overall story. They're thinking about what they want to do. And that isn't just a Star Trek problem. It's an actor problem. So not a big fan of Nemesis, although there's some nice effects. And 2 words, Dina Meyer. Yes. Nick, our friend Nick from Echo Base Network says, are there any DS9 references or connections in Star Trek Picard Season 3? Nick, I'm going to have to go with a big no comment. Good buddy. No comment on that. Don't want to speak to that. So I hope that you don't. I wouldn't want to. I'm not saying there are. I'm not saying they're not. I'm just not going to give you any comments on it at all. Kenneth Colton says, Tomorrow Never Dies is on. Oh, take me back to that time. I sadly miss those days, Rob. We need a time machine. Michelle Yeoh. Wylin. People forget. Michelle Yeoh, nominated for an Academy Award, was a Bond girl. Actually, Tomorrow Never Dies, if memory serves, is 1997. World Is Not Enough is 99. So GoldenEye was 95. Tomorrow Never Dies is 97. World Is Not Enough is 99. And then we got Die Another Day, and who cares when that came out? If memory serves. Our friend Kinky Sphincter, my favorite kind, has been a member for 25 months. So thank you for that. Kenneth Colton says, oh, Tomorrow Never Dies is 1997. Damn, iPhone typo. Well, there you go. Glenn Mark says, researching Babar at the moment. Laurent de Brunhoff, one of the son of the original creator, took over for a bit. He's still with us at 97. Well, that's crazy. Hokulawa sends in a super chat. Thank you, Hokulawa. So that's pretty cool. We got some tips. You can also tip. You don't have to send. There's lots of tips. Lieutenant Commander Salinga, let me say, wow, go all the way. You guys are throwing some tips in. First of all, our friend Sonny Dominguez says, what was the news about DC Marvel no longer doing trade paperbacks? I cannot find a source via Google. I can't either. Regarding your desires for weight loss, I too am there myself. Have you looked at DDP Yoga, created by a wrestler for guys to do yoga? Works miracles. Look it up. I got to check that out. Yes, I've no more liquor for me. Maybe the occasional glass of wine, but I'm really looking into V-Shred. I like working out. I like getting into routine and eating well, and V-Shred. I like that. Sonny Dominguez says, Nick Cage and Quentin Tarantino have shared their love for Trek. Could you imagine if they did a Star Trek series at an HBO level in regards to budget and mature content? Look, here's the thing. I don't believe that Star Trek should become R-rated. I think that, here's the thing. Star Trek is, and I am not a, bring on the filthy. You know, Sonny, on this channel, we talk about making the ladies squirt. I am certainly no prude, but I do think that Star Trek, at its conception, at its core, is for a family audience. And that's why I also found Star Trek Picard Season 1 was a murder show. Torture, murder, killing. It was the most un-Star Trek shit I've ever seen. So I do believe that I would love to see an adult-oriented Star Trek, but, you know, make it mature the way that a movie like The Shawshank Redemption is mature. I mean, it deals with some pretty harsh issues in a prison environment, but it handles it in a way that it's not graphic. It doesn't shy away from the tough stuff, but I would love to see that. And I'll tell you something. I was going to say this before, but like David Mack's Destiny trilogy, there's so many Star Trek novels that I think should be adapted. I don't know why they don't delve into that. And by the way, if you do, I've always said that, but that doesn't mean you should go modern Star Trek creators and steal shit out of Star Trek novels. And they're doing a lot of that lately without accreditation. Give the author credit, maybe some money. I mean, they did come up with the ideas. If I don't think the Writers Guild will look kindly on you for that. Anonymous sends in a tip and says, to me, Rob, an imagination connoisseur is loving both Balance of Terror and Spock's Brain, Tarkovsky's Andrei Rublev and They Live, the 1966 Batmobile and the 2001 Space Station, Cliff Idleman's Star Trek VI music, and Lou Reed's Metal Machine music. It's a rich palette. Anonymous, chef's kiss. That's amazing. But you're right. I mean, look, as an imagination connoisseur, I always talk about loving movies like my beloved Star Crash. Do I think Star Crash holds a candle to Star Wars? No. But you summed it up. An imagination connoisseur, this is another thing that really bothers me about modern fandom. Since when did fans want things to fail? You know, when I was growing up, I would go see anything, any science fiction, fantasy, and horror film, and even when things were bad. But then I remember, the thing that's really frustrating nowadays is the things that we love. I mean, we should be getting great stuff. There shouldn't be bad Star Trek. The problem is the people they hire, again, we're going to hire Ivy League educated people. In the case of Star Trek, let's hire television writers that were last week writing for some emotional, This Is Us, but then they come write for Star Trek. What the fuck do you know about science fiction? Have you read Werner Vinge? You know, have you read anyone? Have you read one science fiction novel? I don't think anyone that was involved in Star Trek Discovery ever read a science fiction novel in their lives, because if they had, they wouldn't have the dumbest Star Trek future. The 31st century is the most moronic human future ever depicted in any medium. You know, what if we had like a Mad Max, a fuel shortage? Let's blow up all the dilithium. Yeah, because dilithium is the only thing that can power faster than light drives. I mean, come on, so terrible. But Anonymous, you are right. Jeff Yerke and Mrs. Yerke said, oh, that previous message was made for me. Well, that's why I knew I loved it. Jeff Yerke and Mrs. Y. One day I'm going to come up and party with you. We imagination connoisseurs, we need to stick together. Lieutenant Commander Selinga sends in a tip and says, as a Trek fan, loving allegorical storytelling, rich with metaphors, with believable band of brothers characters working together, reflecting upon the human condition, have a look at the 2022 narrative games Stray and A Plague Tale Requiem. I was just playing Stray last week. God, I love that game. I have to download it for myself. But look, what I miss about Star Trek is allegory. I really do. Star Trek, and to be honest, Star Trek Picard Season 3 it's a little short on allegory, but it delves into emotion, human emotion, the emotion of the characters, more so than collectively than maybe has ever done. They've done it individually in individual episodes, but collectively, what will strike you about Picard Season 3 is the emotional conversations our characters have with one another. And I was taken aback by that. Some truly great, emotional, heartfelt, character-building storytelling happening. Really, really good. But yeah, I mean, Star Trek was always allegorical. That's why another reason I hate Star Trek Discovery Star Trek Discovery, going into the future in the 31st century, in a universe where human beings are marrying other species and procreating with them. If we're that far along, you certainly don't have to have a character call themselves non-binary and tell other characters to use their personal pronouns. In the 31st century, in a universe where infinite diversity and infinite combinations has long been the rule for centuries. And it immediately dates your show, and it makes your writers look stupid. You know, what is the allegorical version of that? Why do you have to be so on the nose? Why do you have to be so didactic? Remember, Star Trek at its best does not tell you what to think. It offers you things to think about. That is the difference between modern Star Trek and good writing. So there you go. Lieutenant Commander Selinga says, especially Plague Tale Requiem. Especially Requiem is a showcase of the powerful storytelling a modern narrative game with its realistic graphics and characters can provide, because you are not a passive viewer but interactive. The protagonist, Amicia, will crawl under your skin. Wow, that sounds good. I'll have to check that out. I would go so far and some comments to the game and gameplay videos on YouTube do too, that Amicia has become one of the greatest protagonist characters in fiction, up there with Ripley or Frodo. Wow. So a Plague Tale Requiem, is that... It sounds a little Last of Us-y, but okay. Tip, watch the Requiem playthrough videos by the voice actors Anna Dimitriou and Charlotte McBurney on Dimitriou's YouTube channel. A live reaction and commentary to the game and its making of, with reactions from the story writers in the chat sometimes. Wow, that's cool. Amicia is a real-time CGI rendered fictional character and is a major achievement in storytelling because during cutscenes, she will feel absolutely real to you, like you see a real human being on your screen, but she is only an illusion made out of light. That sounds pretty amazing. Amicia is a character that was literally loved into being by writer Sebastian Renard, designer Oliver Personet, actress Robin Wolfe, and voice actress Charlotte McBurney. She is a wonderful, beautiful, artistic achievement, a love letter to storytelling. Lieutenant Commander Salinga. Sounds like you have a bit of a crush. But that sounds very cool. I'm definitely down with seeing... the technology of AI is just insane. Tatman12 sends in a super chat and says, I just watched A Star is Born. Truly great. Lady Gaga has some acting chops for sure. Surprised to see it was directed by Bradley Cooper. Bradley Cooper is a very smart, very educated man. When he goes to France, he does all of his interviews in French. He's a fluent French speaker. I'm a big Bradley Cooper fan. Kenneth Colton says, Rob, if you could go back in time to any point during your life, what year would you choose and why? Oh, and this Robservations hoodie is awesome. Oh, I love my Robservations hoodie. I can tell, you know what? I'll tell you when I know exactly when and where I would go back to. I would go back to August of 1998. Oh, no, I'd have to go back earlier than that. And that was when I was editing. When I made Free Enterprise, we shot Free Enterprise in 1998, in February of 98. And I edited the film myself. And I have learned so much about editing. I could have made the film better. It won a lot of awards. If I had done the work that the film needed at the time, we were just too enamored of ourselves. I could have had it distributed through New Line, and my career would have been very, very different. My filmmaking career would have been very, very different. I'm not complaining. I don't look back. I don't have any regrets. But what I wanted to do was make movies, and I wanted to make my first movie when I was 30. That was my goal, and I did it. I made it with my childhood idol. I just didn't know what I didn't know. And so I just would have taken a little bit more time and care. And hopefully 25 years later, I can get the movie out and fix all those things. But that's when I would go back to. I'd go back to when I was 30, 98, 31. I just turned 31. So I would do that. That's what I would do. So, yeah, if that makes sense. But other than that, I've had a pretty great life. I can't complain. But anyway, everyone, look, to reiterate, I'm not a paid shill. I didn't even know Terry Metalis until, he didn't believe me when I said I'd seen Picard season 3. we the first time we actually met in person was at the John Williams concert. He was there with his son. He has a very smart, very delightful son. And he has an incredible wife who's smoking hot, by the way. Really funny, very smart. I think she's a school teacher. She starred in a series of Star Wars fan films. I don't want to say what they are because I don't want to, blow her identity or whatever, but I'll let you find out. She's really lovely. And he's lovely. And, I met him. I recognized him. I was like walking into the John Williams concert. I saw him buying merch for his son. And we've become friends since then. But, yeah, he's a great guy. Terry Metalis is a great guy. But he didn't pay me to talk about Star Trek. No one paid me to talk about Star Trek. I was paid 3 times in my life. I was paid as a Star Trek consultant for Viacom licensing in the 90s. I was paid to work for 2 years on the Star Trek Experience, editing all the videos that you saw when it first opened. I worked with the team that built the Star Trek Experience in Vegas. And I was paid for 3 years to make Star Trek documentaries. Those are the 3 times I was officially paid by either licensees of Paramount, CBS, Viacom, or actually CBS, Paramount, or Viacom. So that's the end of that. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, gentle beings, kind souls, I want to thank first of all, I forgot to thank him yesterday, Tom Jr. Jackson, Goof Emeritus, who came up with the term, we are all goof people. And today is Gene Hackman's 93rd birthday, as he just reminded us. I want to thank you all for coming here. Jordan Saylor says, he's been a member of the channel for 7 months. He says, you being someone who worked on DVD special features, who ultimately decided on which features, like commentaries and such, that goes on the disc? Jordan, that is a great question. Okay. So when we were doing special features, it was up to us. We had to submit a proposal to the studio. In this case, we were working with Ken Ross and all the people at CBS Home Entertainment, and we had to submit a proposal about what we wanted to do and what we'd haggle over the budget. So it was really based on the budget, and we did whatever we wanted to do, and so we decided, okay, they had first wanted us to do like 15 or 20 minutes a season. And we're like, come on, really? And so, and we could only do 30-minute featurettes. There was various rules, SAG rules and things like that, because any featurettes that were over 30 minutes are no longer promotional. They become programming on their own, and people need to get paid. So we were we did 90-minute documentaries. I basically set the tone. Roger was more working on Enterprise, and I was doing TNG, but we were working together the whole time. So I was doing documentaries, and then when we could, we would do audio commentaries. We'd do as much as we can, as much as they would give us, as much disc real estate as possible. And that was true of everything. Like when I worked on Lord of the Rings, the team, Michael Pellerin and Jeff Curdy, submitted proposals. So you'd submit proposals to the home video division, say what you wanted to do, and we'd want to do as much as we could. And documentaries, audio commentaries, any kind of art galleries, whatever we could, we'd get away with. And that was all good. So that's how we made those decisions. So anyway, on that note, I'm going to end this, and I want to say thank you for being here. Please smash that like button, subscribe, become a member of the channel. We're having member calls. So for those of you who don't know, when I say member calls, they usually last 3 to 4 hours, and we all come into it. It's a Zoom call. It is live on the channel. But you come into the Zoom call, people raise their hands, and we usually give people, depending on how many people are there, we'll give you 7 minutes or 10 minutes. You can ask me or ask the group whatever you want, and then we will answer. And it's really fun. I really love those membership chats. And we'll be doing more stuff for the members. And also, we're starting the Otaku Experience on this channel. We've got Ladies of the PGS, and we have an all-Spanish show called Que Pasa PGS, put on by Roberto Suarez and Alex Montaño. And I'm very proud that we're doing that show. So come back and check it out. And then, of course, we've got Let's Get Physical Media coming up on Sundays with Dieter Bastian in Saarbrücken, Deutschland. And I'll be doing Robservations more often than I have been. So thanks for being here. Remember, not a paid shill. Nobody pays me to watch Star Trek. The reason I have been such an ardent supporter of Star Trek Picard Season 3 is I think it's a change in modern Star Trek. I think for one reason only. There was a creator in Terry Matalas that cared. I mean, he changed everything. He got rid of who he didn't want to, that didn't fit his vision. Everything from the cinematography. I know people are saying, "Well, it looks like the same grim dark." Trust me, it's not. As a matter of fact, it's far more bright and colorful than you imagine it being. And I'll tell you something else. As much as if I had cut the trailers for Picard Season 3, I wouldn't. I know they want action adventure, and I know this last trailer was shown during the AFC conference game. I get it. But those trailers, none of the trailers for Star Trek Picard Season 3 have captured what it feels like to actually watch the season. Hasn't even come close. There's a lot more character and emotion in the season than has even been hinted at in those trailers. Not to say the trailers are bad. I don't think they capture the essence of the show, though. So, not a paid shill. Just love good Star Trek. And I hope you do too. Remember, starts on Paramount Plus on February 16th. Check it out. And on that note, remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And yeah, I think I stole this my thumbnail from Trek Central. Sorry, boys and girls, gentle beings, kind souls, however you identify. I took this because I'll tell you something. Ed Spaliers and Todd Stashwick are two great new additions to the Star Trek pantheon of characters. I think you're going to love them both, and can't wait for the fans to talk about them.